U.S. Modernist Radio is part of DesignNetwork.org, exclusive architecture and design podcasts reaching creative listeners worldwide.
Hi, I'm Henry Keene. I'm the author of Architects' Gravesites, the book, and I'm happy to welcome you to U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. Remember when libraries were dark, stately places with only books and magazines, where if you talked at more than a whisper, some stern librarian would shush you and forget about eating or drinking? Well, those stately libraries do still exist. New libraries often have computers, 3D printing, video production, even lattes.
Yum.
New library construction is almost always modern, with naturally lit rooms replacing those dark bookstacks. Libraries have become community centers, voting centers, and social services centers as well. Joining us today are two well-known library architects, Raleigh, North Carolina's Louis Cherry, and direct and live from Oslo, Norway, architect Siv Helene Stangeland. And now, still on the most wanted list at the Wake County Library System, here's your host, George Smart.
Thanks, Tom. I spent a lot of time in libraries growing up. We used to have a mall called North Hills. It's called something else now. It's big, full of towers. But in that mall, there was a very small county library. 4 small offices, 1,500 square feet of books, and no bathrooms. You had to go out to the Scotty Burger to pee.
Oh, I remember that.
There was a particularly wonderful librarian at this library named Joel, who showed me how to use the ancient card catalog and the hottest technology of the time, microfiche. It was an awful technology which you could read entire books and magazines with just a few tiny sheets of plastic. Joel had a ponytail and was hip and brilliant and hilarious, always telling jokes and making dirty puns, many of which HR will not allow you to say today. He would let me return books late without a fee as long as I kept reading. He was a huge Waylon Jennings fan. A few years later, when Joel was dying of cancer, his friends got Waylon to actually come to Joel's bedside. Both Joel and the North Hills Library are long gone. And I also hope Wake County has done away with overdue book fees, because I never returned the Happy Hollisters on Mystery Mountain.
Uh-oh.
Perhaps Waylon and Joel will put a good word with me with the higher-ups, like way higher up. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Modernist realtor Angela Roll.
In our continuing world of make-believe, in 1997, modernist realtor Angela Roll had already established herself on the runway in Milan. She wasn't modeling, as that would have been way too easy. Instead, she had learned to fly at Milan's airport and attached the attention of Supo, Finland's security service. As part of a mission to fly 2,000 pounds of Xander from Helsinki to Los Angeles,
That's a fish.
She met architect Ray Cappy at an Arby's and charmed him with her love for Sci-Arc. Soon, she said goodbye to flying and was running architectural tours in Los Angeles around Silver Lake. But this was not to last. Called into service by Supo for one last mission, she was sent to rescue IKEA furniture from noted modernist hater Prince Charles, who was about to set it ablaze when she was captured by MI6 and forced to watch Benny Hill reruns.
Uh-oh.
Today, as a modernist realtor, Angela continues to defend modernism, dealing with unreasonable sellers, unrealistic buyers, incompetent builders, and bureaucratic city councils. Reach Angela at angelaroll.com, that's ROEHL, or call 919-995-0550. And returning to our podcast today, we welcome Raleigh architect, artist, and banjo player Louis Cherry. Since 1983, he's focused on modern residential, commercial, and institutional design, with a special love for a place called Penland. An adjunct instructor in the NCSU College of Design, he's designed 9 libraries, including most recently the Michael E. Bush Library in Annapolis, Maryland. Welcome, Louis.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Siv Helene Stangeland studied architecture at the Oslo Norway School of Architecture and Design. In 1996, she and Reinhard Propf founded the practice Helen and Hard with 26 people drawn from 10 different countries, with offices in Stavanger and Oslo. Helen and Hard has designed residences, mixed-use commercial schemes, and 2 beautiful libraries in Vennesla and Grimstad. Welcome, Siv.
Thank you.
Louis, before we get started, tell our listeners about Penland and what you've built there.
Sure. So Penland is a school of crafts in the mountains of North Carolina, and it was originally started in the 1920s as a way to teach some of these mountain ladies to weave and make a little money to help support their families. And it's become, over the years, one of the, in the U.S., one of 2 or 3 really high-level places where people can study crafts of all kinds, from, weaving, photography, painting, drawing,
welding, even.
Ceramics, welding, blacksmithing, woodworking, and they attract the really finest crafts teachers from all over the world to teach there. It's become such a great destination. I've been working there for the past 10 years on some projects, one being the kind of the center community building of the campus, the Northlight building, which is where there are lectures and movies and yoga in the morning. And then that also houses the photography studio and the papermaking studio. And then I recently just completed, just in the past couple of weeks, a residence for 10 fellows who have a 2-year fellowship there, a work-study fellowship. So it's a kind of a residence hall for the 10 students.
Are they students or instructors?
They are not instructors. They actually set up their own studio, and they can take any course and use any equipment on campus that they want to, and they have to work some hour, I forget, 25 hours or something a week, gardening, cooking, helping with, the campus, maintaining the campus, so that they don't actually teach.
Okay. So like camp counselors a little bit.
Right.
Yeah.
Louis, my mother was a student at Penland back in the late 60s. She was a weaver.
Wow.
And we grew up in Durham. She took a 2 or 4 week course there in the summer of 69. I was at camp for part of that. I was a teenager, but came to join her in the last week or 2. It was so cool. It really was.
Well, it's a magical environment, and it's a place where people can go and kind of rediscover themselves and find ways of being a kind of creative and part of a creative community in this amazing setting, and it's really special.
There was an instructor named Bernard who had come from, I think, New York City, who was why my mother stayed and really got a lot out of it. Weaving was her big thing after I got out underfoot from her for many years.
Yeah, that's
so it's just cool to hear Penland again. Yeah. A lot of her yarn when she retired wound up going up to Penland.
Well, now it's time to weave in some libraries into our conversation. Siv, think back. What was the first library you were in as a child? What was that like?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it was the school library up in the north of Norway, where I went to school for 2 years. Very small, very tiny, but I remember the smell of all the books. So fascinating me, kind of, this being surrounded by books in a room. I can remember.
Was it the only library in town?
Yes, that was a very small town, indeed. But then I visited a lot of libraries later on, and I think I'm still mostly fascinated of having these tons of books around me, more than reading. It's just walking around in these spaces filled up with so many libraries. I think that books. I mean, it's so fascinating.
You just feel the knowledge kind of pulsating around you.
Yeah, and all the stories and all the people that has read these stories.
Right, and the opportunity to pull one off the shelf and leaf through it, but which one?
Yeah. Exactly.
Louis, how about you? You grew up in Grifton. Was there a Grifton town library?
No, there was not a public library there, but it's funny, the smell certainly, I think probably many, many people would, I can instantly recall that smell. There's a bit of dust.
Yes.
And yeah, there's such
and the
a
paper.
specific,
You smell the paper?
Yeah, very specific smell.
And the glue.
But but for me, it was the school library. And I remember this was a very, very small rural town. And books were my gateway, to the world. And so that was a very important experience for me, is just discovering things. And I was a very avid reader as a young child, and just being able to pull things off the shelf and enter this world was incredible.
Now, Siv, in Norway, libraries have been more community and social centers than they have in other parts of the world for much longer, right?
Yeah, I think so. There have been a special support by the government to build quite a lot of community cultural centers, which also often contain libraries throughout the long country we have, where we don't have big cities. Most cities in Norway are under 100,000 inhabitants. So to have the possibility then to have a cultural center where there is a library is of course a very, very special gift, I think. And this could only happen because there was a special program saying that every small city should have a community center with a library, and also, of course, a stage and a cinema. So you often have these library as part of a cultural center where everything is there. The cinema, the small theater stage, the coffee, the gallery, and the library.
Oh, that sounds great.
Doesn't that sound
together.
fabulous?
Yeah.
Yeah, at least it's very fun to draw these packed small community centers as an architect, because it's a lot of challenging spaces to create, and you have to be very, very efficient with where you put the square meters, and that you can handle all the program within the budget, because there is not much money.
When did you design your first library, and where was it?
The first one was, in fact, not Vennesla, but it was in Flekkefjord, which is an even smaller city. And this was exactly such a packed, small cultural building where the library was kind of a part of the first floor, and where the emphasis was maybe more on the theater that they wanted. They wanted a small theater, but there was a library there as well.
Now, Louis, what was the first library you designed, and when was that?
The first library I designed was in Garner, which is in Wake County, the county that Raleigh is in. And it was the Southeast Regional Library, and it was a 20,000 square foot. It was one of a handful of regional libraries that the Wake County system built then. And that was in 1988.
And had computers taken hold of libraries by that point? Had they made their entry? Because that had been, about 5 years personal computers had been out?
They just were becoming a part of the program where there was a bank of computers that could be used.
Probably wasn't much internet at that point.
No, not yet.
No,
the internet hadn't come along yet.
No.
Well, not that we knew of it.
Not in Garner.
Yeah, not in Garner. And Siv, what about you? When did the computers come into libraries in Norway?
I don't know. I think I can remember that when I was in high school, there were some very big computers there. So in 85 already, maybe some. Okay.
Now, Louis, of the 9 libraries you've designed, 6 are here in Wake County and 2 more in different counties and 1 in Maryland. Mm-hmm. Did that first one in Garner just sort of lead to all the rest of them, or how did that happen? How did you become the go-to library guy?
Well, I think it was a few things. One, that I'm very interested in light, and I'm very interested in community building kind of spaces. And so the libraries check a lot of the boxes of things that I'm passionate about. And so I was very avid to be competitive for these libraries that would come up. And it was important to me to be, considered and get interviewed and so forth. So it's a very competitive process, as you know.
It is, yeah.
And I guess, success breeds success. The libraries were people liked them. They were very well received. And so, yeah, I would love to do only libraries, really. I'd be very happy. There's no building type that I think is really just more kind of pleasurable in so many ways. And, you really feel you're doing something that has a tangible, important role in making a community stronger and better.
You did the North Regional Library in Wake County, didn't you?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, that's my local library.
Yeah.
It's currently closed for renovations, but it looks like an open book.
Yeah.
Which I guess is no accident. Duh.
Siv, in Norway, your Vanessa Library is much heralded. Tell us about that building.
Yeah, this was a competition we won, and we made a very brave entry there because Vennesla is a small town. I think there are 8,000 people living there. The city is basically one street, not much happening, not much architecture to look at. So when we delivered this competition, we all really wondered if this could be maybe over the top for them, because it was a very special and the brave design we delivered. So we were very surprised when we won that competition, and even more surprised to feel the support that the municipality and the whole community showed when they were able then to go on and develop the project further, because they had worked 10 years just to get the money for that library. So everyone was waiting for it. And it's not a big special site. It's a fill-in between an old cinema and a kind of provisoric community center built into an office building. So we decided somehow to bridge the gap between these two buildings and say, okay, let's just fill in the library between them and make a kind of bigger building out of it. The library being then the kind of meeting and central space for all the activities. So that was the main idea, that this library should kind of become this bigger public space that this small city has nothing alike. And by doing that, we kind of gained the possibility to make something very grandiose, because the program is small. It's just 2,000 square meters. So we had to kind of gather the program along the walls and then prioritize to make these big arches that spans between the two existing buildings.
So it does incorporate the other buildings, the cinema and I forget what you...
Community space, yeah.
And this won quite a few awards.
Yes, it has won the national award. Yeah, I think it also won the timber construction award. We have one in Norway, and it has been published very much. And it also has been picked out to be one of the most beautiful libraries in the world.
Yes,
it's really beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, you should be Googling this, folks. It's spelled Vennesla, Vennesla. And you can see the photos of this as we go along. Louis, how do you design a library space to feel welcoming for people from all over the economic spectrum, for anybody to come in to just feel welcome right away?
Well, I think you want to make it feel sort of like a public living room, almost like a public square. And so beautiful light is always like what makes spaces feel welcoming. That's a huge thing, that it has natural light and it just feels open and safe. And then I think you create it like a living room in terms of the furnishings, and that it's all about kind of comfort and having choices. It's a non-hierarchical. It's a big change in how libraries have evolved in the U.S. I'm sure it's very different in Scandinavia, but it used to be, it was a very controlling environment with a point of control for the circulation and a point of control for checkout, and very
right. You come in, there's a big giant mahogany desk in front of you. Right?
Yeah,
and the librarian going, shh.
Yeah, and now, in even using computers used to be all in banks in a row, and so there were very few choices, and I think there was a certain intimidation, and so when you walk in a library and you can see that there are many options in terms of where you can go sit, whether it's by yourself or in a group with other people, and it looks like it's comfortable. These are comfortable seats, and you can just pull out your laptop and plug in anywhere. So I think that's it. It's just to really create an inviting, beautiful space, and then provide an easy access to a lot of different options.
Louis, light is very important to you in your library design. Siv, in Norway, I would think in certain times of the year, there's not a lot of light to be had, natural light.
No.
So how do you deal with it? Yeah.
Yeah, we work a lot with light as well. And in Vanessa Library, we have kind of, you can walk in there when it's dark outside, and you could get the impression that it's the low evening light passing through the space. And this is achieved by integrated light within the timber structure, which is a kind of warm light. So we work with natural light, of course, but we also have to compensate with bringing light, artificial light in. And then that we do very carefully by often describing the timber structure with light. So it becomes very integrated, and you don't think about it as lamps hanging around.
Right.
It's more a flow of light that is making an atmosphere.
So it doesn't hit you in the face when you walk in.
That's
Where's my
also
sunglasses?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So in American libraries for quite a few decades, there's been a struggle with the homeless using libraries. Is that an issue in Norway as well?
Oh, I think we have people that come in and use libraries that shouldn't use them, of course, but I think they can, in fact, be there quite a lot. As I've heard, for example, in not homeless, but elderly people stay in libraries a lot if they don't have a good place to meet other people. So, and I think they're quite generous with that normally.
In Norway, yes. And Louis, how about here with the libraries you design? How do you accommodate the fact that there's going to be really different kinds of population, including the homeless in there?
Yeah, well, I would just say that most all of the librarians that I have known and worked with and interacted with are very kind and giving people. Sort of, I think it's a self-selecting group in a way. And in the downtown branch in Raleigh, that was a problem.
Yeah.
And that's the only example where I think they've had to sort of create some boundaries. So mostly it's just tolerated or embraced to the fact that the library is for everyone and people have different needs, and those needs are pretty flexible.
Yes.
So I find that the environment, they would err on the side of a lot of tolerance for those individuals.
Siv, do you use your libraries in Norway to vote?
I don't know. I'm sure we use all kind of spaces for voting. But I don't know if they've used Vanessa for that. But they use libraries for a lot of different celebrations and events, of course. In Vanessa, I know that they use it for weddings. I think that's beautiful.
Oh, yeah, I bet, in that small town.
Yeah.
Louis, your libraries are used for voting all the time, I know, because they're polling places. Mm-hmm. So how do you incorporate that into the design? Because that's going to be a major use, 10 days a year, something like that?
I mean, honestly, that's not something that was really talked about in the programming and design, but I think they probably were selected because by default or by virtue of how they are designed and operate on a day-to-day basis, they kind of lend themselves to be adapted for that, because they're large open spaces and there's a clear kind of entry and circulation and the infrastructure to support that.
Yeah, so you can get people in and out without disturbing the main operations of the library.
Right.
Siv, our research team discovered that you bought a factory and had a very unique living, working situation. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that's how we started, I think. And it really was our way of surviving as newborn architects that could only earn quite small part of what we needed in the beginning as architects. So we had to make things. We did interiors. We used the factory space for earning money besides starting our office. But it grew also into being a very, very beautiful work and living space. And we also had events there. We had a kind of surplus space, which is fantastic. So we could also build things in the backyard, prototyping smaller projects or parts of projects or part of furnitures that we designed. Yeah, it was our own world kind of there. And we could live there for free. And we also rented out parts of it for students that helped us. So it filled a lot of needs for a long period, in fact, up until 2013. But then we grew out of it and we decided to invest it into one of our co-living projects. So it has been transformed into a very nice co-living project where we live now.
Louis, in your most recent library in Maryland, what are some of the cool things that you can do in there? Because it's not just books and magazines. It's a lot of different functions.
Yeah, so a big evolution that's relatively recent in libraries in the U.S. is to offer access to things and processes and materials and tools. And so it's common now in public libraries that you can check out a camera or you can check out a sound recording device or...
Like I used to be able to check out a slide projector years ago from certain libraries.
Yeah, and so there are maker spaces where you can build robots and they have all the setup there. And so that's an educational tool, a kind of community resource, and a programming resource for certain age groups and certain kids with certain interests or adults. Big emphasis on meeting spaces so that the library becomes much more sort of integrated into the community, looking at English as a second language community and places for, classrooms and that kind of activities. And then understanding in the Michael E. Bush Library, understanding certain segments of the population, particularly young teens, to try to create a space that is really theirs and it's comfortable for that little slice of life where they don't really fit in to the other areas.
Yeah.
Those are some of the things.
So what are the things you do for teens? What kind of spaces do they have?
A bit of separation, a bit of they can claim that, and I think really trying to dial into their kind of decor and some of the colors and furnishings that are more like how they might think of their room at home. Pretty subtle, really. I mean, there's nothing sort of dramatic.
Right. Siv, have libraries in Norway always allowed you to have coffee, food, and drink? Because it hasn't been that way in the United States.
No, I think that's something that has also entered the last 10 years, understanding libraries more as a meeting place to meet, a place for the community to gather. I think that's something that has entered the last 10 years or so. I think before there were much more only libraries and only books. So I think that just like you told about, the libraries has gotten more and more functions and different programs added to them. And I think one of the issues that we are meeting is that because of this demand of new programs or new functions added, people want more and more flexible libraries. And it's for us as architects, it's a bit annoying because the flexibility is not always giving the best design solutions. And then you have these bookshelves standing around, and they should be flexible and possible to move if there's going to be an event or if they want to make more space for something, but they never are moved, in fact. So it's a kind of a lie often. Of course, it could be done, but then you need to really think it through, and it costs a lot to make flexible design really nice and functioning over time. So in Vanessa Library, we were lucky lucky to work with a librarian and an administration that was willing to say that books are so important and integral to our library that we build the shelves as part of the architecture. And I think that maybe that's quite important for that space. And it reminds us much of the old libraries, like my favorite one is Trinity College in Dublin.
Sure,
where you have these
very classic.
Where you really feel that the walls are made of books. So to be surrounded by books and made in a beautiful way as integral to the architectural space is more and more seldom, because these flexible shelves on wheels are entering our libraries all around.
I think I can tell how you feel about them.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if you have that dilemma in the States, but this has been a big discussion, in fact, in Norway, how to design flexible, whether we should design always super flexible libraries or not.
Louis, in some of your libraries, there's the coffee bar, right?
Yeah, several actually.
Yeah.
And that's definitely a trend. And, to the sort of the point about engagement and libraries as places of interaction, I think of it somewhat as like back when libraries were just about handing out a book to someone, information was considered to be a one-way street, from the book to you. And now I think we understand that learning and communication and interaction is all actually also very important. And so I think that it's just sort of an acceptance that you really want to get people into the library. You want to give them the things that they need and want while they're there, and you want to facilitate them being there and having a great experience. So in fact, libraries consider themselves a retail operation in many ways, that they are competing. Back when Barnes & Noble stores became kind of great meeting places.
Yeah, because they had those chairs spread all around the place.
Yeah, and they always had a cafe, and they had a very kind of a merchandising approach to the books with the covers facing out. And I remember distinctly the librarians were like, "Oh crap,
Well, and places like Starbucks started putting in more books and reading material.
Yeah.
So they sort of wandered towards each other in a way.
Yeah, very, very true. Yeah.
Siv, what's the future of libraries in Norway? What's the next great thing to come along for the buildings that you're designing?
That's a good question. I think that we always have to think about them as a possibility to make also beautiful public spaces. And this possibility of being intimate and at the same time in a public space. I mean, when you dive into a book, you dive into a kind of personal, intimate encounter with something that you yourself is passionate about or you discover. And that's a very, more and more maybe a seldom thing you do in a public space. So I think if we can provide these generous, beautiful space where that's possible, and it's possible to do individually, but also together with friends or groups, I think it's very healthy, important thing to provide our future societies with. So not let them be too technical and too flexible.
Right, because it takes away from the experience of being at a library.
Yeah, exactly.
Louis, how would you look at that for the future?
Well, I agree very much with how Siv stated that. I think it is really important that libraries have a certain grandeur, I will say, even, that when you come in that this is an important public place, not over the top, but there is almost nothing left for the public that is for everyone. I mean, there are very few remaining places where no matter what your social, economic status, your race, your religion, whatever, you are truly welcome and have full reign. And so I think that should be celebrated and distinguished as the important social function that it is. And so I think it's really important that they feel like a special place that is prominent and important. And then, of course, comfortable and the intimacy and all the things that you also have to accomplish in there. But I just think they can't be just some throwaway kind of design solution that is just housing the program.
If you haven't been to a library lately, and a lot of people haven't been in a long time, this is your chance to go out and discover how libraries have changed and how they become these great social centers in a very different way than it was in the 80s and 90s or before.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to acknowledge, too, in this conversation that the Hunt Library at NC State that Snohetta designed, I know you know them well, Siv, is a phenomenal library. And, it's a university library, but it's been really interesting to see university libraries and public libraries are growing together in terms of how they function in a lot of ways. I mean, there are still some substantial differences, but the Hunt Library, in terms of being this exciting place to discover all kinds of creative activities and recording music, and, the books are very important, but it's a really cool experience for people visiting Raleigh. I mean, I always recommend people go see the Hunt Library.
Yeah, when I was in junior high, our library was renamed a media center, which everyone thought was a joke because it was still the same books that they had there the week before. There was really nothing different about it.
Yeah.
Well, these days, libraries actually are media centers of all types. I mean, even some of them
they
have...
were just ahead of their time.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, Siv and Louis, thank you so much for joining us. This has been fun.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Modernist realtor Angela Roll. Okay, Tom?
Visit usmodernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 12,000 significant modernist houses, and access 4 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song was performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl. Rogue archivist Carrie Cesarino is so revered, we supply her with coffee-flavored stout whenever she's in the office. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive Incorporated, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. George and I'll be back soon with another library card-carrying, hold-on-to-your-microfiche edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.